Good morning, everyone. This is probably going to make a number of people upset, and as upset as our nation is right now, I rightly don't care. Um, Something that maybe the press and the pandering politicians and the pandering press and the pandering leaders may want to realize that the vast majority of white people, white folk, of which I happen to be one, have no idea what you're talking about when you talk about the fact that we have white privilege. See, the reason for that being is this: most of us grow up in small white towns. I grew up in a small white town. I had no privilege in that white town. There were people who did have privilege in that white town, and they let you know that they had that privilege. They had privilege because they were rich, because they owned the bank, because they were the lawyers, because they owned the big industry, and they had that privilege and they lorded it over you. But being white didn't give me any privilege because we were all white. So there were ranks, and there were people who were better than other people based on this supposed privilege. And it was difficult to get jobs in certain places if you did not have the power. I know that the only way to get jobs working for the state is if you had some sort of patronage, somebody who could help you out, some fancy schmancy politician who had the power who would get you a job. Had nothing to do with anything else. It certainly didn't have anything to do with color. I remember walking down the street as a young man on Ash Wednesday with my father. We both had ashes on our forehead because, God forbid, we were Catholic. And listening as cars drove by and yelled out things like fish eater and mackerel snapper because, see, being Catholic was bad. If you're going to be a good white person, you are going to be a Protestant good white person. So the whole idea of white privilege is lost on me, and it's lost on people my generation. It's lost on people my father's generation. It's lost on many white people who never grew up around the racism that we see in major big cities. So if we do not immediately succumb to the guilt that's being thrown on us about white privilege, please understand it's because we're coming from a place where we never did anything but experience the harm of not being the right type of white person. Now, maybe it's easier for those obnoxious white people who use their superiority or their supposed superiority to use that against people of color because you can see their color. But trust me, they use that same insidiousness against other white people. And that's the way it's been. I'm part Italian. The Italians in our neighborhood, in our city, were only allowed to live in Little Italy. So as they immigrated, they had to live down there. And I got to listen to lots of jokes about the Italians. Those jokes were primarily made by the people who were on top. I got to listen to lots of jokes about the Irish. There were two Catholic churches in our town, separated, because when they were first built and the powers to be, they decided that the Irish could only live across the river and come across the river to their church or on weekends so that they could party. Otherwise, they didn't really want those Irish living close to them. And the Italians, let's keep those down there on the lower end. They even called that area of the town I lived in the coast. It was down there beside the railroad tracks. So as long as you're down there beside the railroad tracks, but the good folk, the good white folk, they lived in the middle of town. They owned the stores. They lived up on the hills around the town. So if I don't get all upset when people start talking to me that I should have white guilt, please understand that I don't have any white guilt. I don't have any white guilt because I didn't grow up with anything other than wondering why people thought they were better than me. I grew up with anger. I grew up with, I'll show you. I grew up with a willingness to outwork anybody else because how the hell dare they, anybody, make the decision as to what I am and what I could be. And so when it comes down to trying to make me feel like I should have white guilt because I had all these advantages because I was born white, that's a lie. And it's a lie for the vast majority of white Americans, since the vast majority of white Americans grew up in white towns that had a hierarchy of hate and made sure that certain whites were on the bottom of that chain and they weren't ever allowed to come up out of it. So actually, those people who were involved in Black Lives Matters, you could have a huge, huge group of supporters who understand, not as in as difficult a way, but who understand what you have historically gone through, and they happen to be white. I just thought you should know that little history lesson. Have a good day.